The HOA patrol had climbed my fence for the third time this month, and I'd had enough. They ignored the warnings, they ignored the "no trespassing" signs, so I decided to give them a warning they couldn't possibly ignore. My formal complaints went into a shredder, my pleas for privacy were met with smug indifference. So, I decided to speak a language that even the most entitled busybody would understand, the language of consequence. The American dream, for me, was never some sprawling mansion or a fleet of fancy cars. It was simpler. It was the quiet dignity of a front door that locked behind you, creating a sanctuary. The smell of your own freshly cut grass on a Saturday morning. The sound of my family's laughter echoing in a backyard that belonged to us. I found that dream in a quiet, tree-lined subdivision called Oakmont Creek. It was a nice house, with a sturdy oak in the front yard and a beautiful, private fence enclosing the back. This wasn't just wood and nails. It was a boundary between the world and my peace. It was my piece of the dream, a dream I had worked my entire life to build. I soon learned, however, that some people see a dream like mine not as something to respect, but as something to test. And for one particular HOA patrolman, my fence wasn't a boundary, it was a suggestion he was more than willing to ignore. Moving into Oakmont Creek felt like the final chapter of a long book. My wife and I had saved for years, making sacrifices, budgeting every dollar, all with this exact life in our minds. We weren't just buying a property, we were buying a future. The neighborhood seemed perfect, almost suspiciously so. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, a palpable sense of order. The welcoming committee was pleasant enough, handing us a welcome basket with one hand and a 3-inch thick binder with the other. This was the holy text, the Homeowners Association bylaws. At the time, I laughed it off. How complicated could it be? Keep your lawn tidy, don't paint your house purple, bring your trash cans in on time. Simple. I'm a responsible homeowner, a man who takes pride in his property. I had nothing to worry about. Boy, was I wrong. My first introduction to the true nature of the Oakmont Creek HOA came as a man we'll call Officer Miller. He wasn't a cop, of course, though he certainly carried himself like one. He was the head of the Community Standards Patrol, a title so grand it was almost comical. Miller was a man in his late 50s with a military-style buzz cut and a perpetual look of stern disapproval. He drove a white golf cart with a flashing amber light, patrolling the quiet suburban streets like a pint-sized general surveying his kingdom. The first notice appeared on my door about a month after we moved in. A crisp, official-looking letter. The violation. Grass height exceeds the community standard of 3.5 inches in several patches. I read it and actually laughed. I got out a ruler. Sure enough, a few patches were closer to 4 inches. The sheer pettiness was astounding. But, wanting to be a good neighbor, I mowed the lawn that evening. The next week, another notice. Improper storage of waste receptacle. I'd left the trash can at the curb for an hour and a half too long. I was at work, my wife was running errands. An honest oversight. This became the pattern. A notice for a tiny, nearly invisible oil stain on the driveway. A warning about my son's bicycle being left on the porch. Each letter was a small paper cut, making my sanctuary feel a little less like my own. I started to notice a strange pattern, though. My neighbor to the left, a friendly older white couple, had a garden hose that was perpetually messy. My neighbor across the street had a small crack in their driveway that had been there for months. Yet, my mailbox was the one attracting Miller's attention. It was a subtle, gnawing feeling that something was off, a feeling I couldn't quite prove. The first time he crossed the line, the literal line of my property, was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my home office on a call when I saw the flash of his white golf cart. He didn't just stop at the curb. He parked, got out, and walked right onto my lawn to the side of my house, peering at the slats of my fence. I ended my call and went outside. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Miller turned, unfazed. No apology, no surprise. Just doing a standard perimeter inspection, he said, his tone clipped. Making sure the fence is up to code. We've had some complaints. Complaints from who? I asked. And if you need to inspect my fence, you can do so from the public sidewalk. Or you can call me. You are on my private property. He scoffed. The HOA has an easement to ensure all properties are in compliance. I can be here. I'm quite sure you don't, I replied. You have an easement on the first few feet from the curb. You're 30 feet inside my property line. Please leave. He gave me a long, hard stare, then turned and walked back to his cart without another word. The interaction left a sour taste in my mouth. It was the complete lack of respect, the assumption that his authority trumped my rights. That night, I did what I always do, I researched. I spent hours poring over that 3-inch binder. I read every line about property inspections, easements, and the patrol's authority. And just as I suspected, our bylaws were clear. HOA reps were not to enter a homeowner's private property, especially a fenced-in yard, without express, prior permission, unless it was a documented emergency. A perimeter inspection definitely wasn't an emergency. Armed with this, I felt better. The rules were on my side. I'm one of only a handful of black families in Oakmont Creek, and I had wanted to believe it was a coincidence, that Miller was just a power-tripping guy who hassled everyone. But the more I thought about it, the more I noticed his little amber light seemed to flash just a bit longer when he passed my house. The ugly suspicion that I wasn't just being hassled, but targeted, was growing. And that feeling made my home feel incredibly vulnerable. Section 2, The Escalation. 2 weeks passed. I started to hope my confrontation had worked. That he had checked the rules, realized his error, and backed off. But I was wrong. It was a beautiful Saturday. I was in the backyard with my son, teaching him how to throw a baseball. A perfect father-son moment. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. It was Miller. He wasn't even trying to be subtle. He was at the far corner of my yard, actively yanking on a fence post. He had walked down the alley behind our properties and, finding the gate locked, had simply climbed over it. A hot, white anger surged through me. This wasn't about bylaws anymore. This was a stranger invading my family's space while my child was right there. The sanctuary had been breached. Get off my property. Now. My voice boomed across the yard. My son froze. Miller looked up, not with shock, but with the annoyed expression of someone who'd been interrupted. I'm inspecting this fence line, he stated flatly. I don't care what you're doing, I said, walking towards him. I told you not to set foot on my property without permission. You are trespassing. You climbed a locked gate. Get out, before I call the police. You're obstructing an HOA investigation, he shot back. This fence is in violation of Section 14B. We can talk about Section 14B after you're back on public property, I said, pointing. Leave the way you came in. And do not come back. After a tense standoff, he clumsily clambered back over the fence and disappeared. The perfect Saturday was ruined. My son was scared, my wife was angry. My home no longer felt safe. I knew this was a campaign of harassment. That evening, I started searching online for HOA harassment, selective enforcement, and trespassing by HOA. I found an avalanche of stories. But as I dug deeper, I found something more important. I started reading about the Fair Housing Act and something called disparate impact. This legal theory holds that even if a rule seems neutral, if it disproportionately affects a protected group without a legitimate business necessity, it's illegal. I read about HUD investigations and major lawsuits where HOAs faced federal charges for using community standards as a weapon to harass and push out minority families. The nitpicking fines, the constant surveillance, the aggressive trespassing, it wasn't random. It was a playbook. A chill went down my spine. This wasn't just about my lawn, was it? This was about my black family living in a neighborhood where someone like Miller felt we didn't belong. The next morning, I wrote a formal, legally worded letter to the HOA board. I cited their own bylaws on property access. I detailed the trespassing incidents by Officer Miller. I formally demanded they instruct their employee to cease and desist all trespassing. I sent it via certified mail. I was creating a paper trail. The HOA's response came a week later. A cold, dismissive form letter. It said their patrol was just ensuring the aesthetic harmony of the community, and that all actions taken were in accordance with this mission. They completely ignored the illegal trespassing. They were backing their man. That letter was the final straw. They had ignored my polite request, my firm confrontation, and my formal, documented warning. The system was failing me. The rules were only being applied to me, not for me. They left me no choice. If they wouldn't respect my boundary, the decision was made with the cold clarity of a man out of options. Warnings were wind. Letters were paper. I needed a physical deterrent. I started researching again, but with new search terms: non-lethal electric fence, livestock fence charger, legal requirements security electric fence. I learned the key was getting a low-voltage, high-amperage agricultural charger, the kind for cattle. It's designed to deliver a powerful, startling jolt that you remember, but it's not designed to cause lasting harm. It's a message, written in volts: do not touch. Legality was my main concern. I dove into my state and local ordinances. The law was tricky. In many residential areas, electric fences are flat out illegal or heavily regulated. However, my local code had a loophole for low-voltage deterrent systems as long as the fence was on your own property and, most importantly, you had clearly posted warning signs. I knew it was almost certainly against the HOA's own rules for unapproved modifications, but they had already shown their rules didn't matter when it came to my rights. The next day, I went to a farm supply store. I bought the charger, wire, insulators, a grounding rod, and 3 large, explicit signs. In big, bold, red letters, they read, "Warning, electric fence." The installation was methodical. I attached insulators to the inside of my back gate, the one Miller climbed. I ran 2 thin aluminum wires across the top. It was barely visible. I connected it all to the charger, which I mounted discreetly by the AC unit. Finally, I attached the 3 warning signs, one on the gate, one on the post next to it, and a third a few feet away. No ambiguity. No one could claim they weren't warned. I flipped the switch. A tiny green light began to blink with a faint, rhythmic tick, tick, tick. The boundary was now active. Now, I just had to wait. I set up my own observation post on my back porch with a book and some iced tea. I wasn't anxious. I felt calm. I had done everything the right way. They chose to escalate. I was simply meeting them on my own terms. A day passed. Then 2. On the 3rd day, it happened. I saw his white cart putter to a stop. Miller got out and marched right up to the gate. He saw the first warning sign. He paused. A smirk crossed his face. I saw it clearly. He thought it was a bluff. He looked around, then with a dismissive shake of his head, he reached up and grabbed the top of the metal gate with his right hand, ready to pull himself over. The result was instantaneous. His body went rigid. A strangled yelp shot out of him. His hand flew back from the gate as if it were red hot. He stumbled backward and landed hard in the alley. He sat there, stunned, his face a perfect picture of shock and bewilderment. He looked at his hand, then at the gate, then back at his hand, unable to process what just happened. The smirk was gone. I didn't laugh. I took a slow sip of my iced tea. The message, I suspected, had finally been delivered. Mid-roll CTA. If you think Officer Miller got what he deserved, do me a favor and shock that like button. And subscribe if you want to hear how this all blew up, because believe me, it was far from over. Section 4, The Resolution. Miller scrambled to his feet, sputtering with rage. He whipped out his phone, and I knew exactly who he was calling. I calmly went inside to wait. About 15 minutes later, a police car pulled up. 2 officers got out. Miller was practically dancing, pointing at the gate and then at his hand. I opened the front door before they knocked. "Good afternoon, officers," I said calmly. The senior officer looked from me to the ranting Miller. "Sir, we received a call about an assault. A gentleman claims you've electrified your fence and intentionally harmed him." "I have installed a low-voltage electric deterrent on my back gate," I replied evenly. "But assault? I'd say I took every precaution to prevent anyone from touching it." I led them to the back. "First," I said, pointing, "this is my property line." He had to leave the public path to even reach the gate. "Second, you'll notice this sign." I pointed to the large, red warning. "And this one. And this one here. They are unambiguous." The younger officer peered at it. "Warning, electric fence." "Yep, that's pretty clear." "Furthermore, this wasn't unprovoked," I continued, handing the officer a prepared folder. "In here is a copy of a formal complaint I sent via certified mail to the HOA detailing his previous trespassing. Here's their response, which ignores my complaint." I repeatedly asked him to stay off my property. He ignored verbal warnings, written warnings, and now, posted warnings. At some point, I have to be able to secure my own home. The officer thumbed through the documents. He saw the certified mail receipt and the HOA's dismissive letter. He let out a long sigh. "So, you warned him, you warned his bosses, and you put up signs. And he touched it anyway." "That's correct, officer," I said. He turned to his partner. "It's a civil matter." He looked back at me. "Sir, can't say I blame you. But you should be aware of the liability. This is a tricky area." He handed the folder back. They had a final word with the fuming Miller and left. No charges. A quiet, profound victory. The war wasn't over. The HOA was apoplectic. 2 days later, a courier delivered a fine for $5,000 for an unapproved structural modification and hazardous public nuisance. They demanded immediate removal. They thought they could bully me. They still didn't understand. I didn't just get angry. I got a lawyer who specialized in housing discrimination. I laid out the whole story for her, the nitpicking, the surveillance, the trespassing, the escalation. I told her about my research into the Fair Housing Act and selective enforcement. Her expression sharpened. "They aren't just fining you for a wire," she said. "They're retaliating because you asserted your rights. We're not just fighting the fine. We're going on the offensive." She drafted a response that was a legal masterpiece. It rejected the fine and accused the Oakmont Creek HOA of a sustained campaign of targeted harassment and selective enforcement, in violation of the Fair Housing Act. It cited legal precedents where rules were used to illegally harass residents based on race. We weren't just defending against a fine, we were threatening a federal lawsuit that could cost them hundreds of thousands and expose them to a HUD investigation. The HOA's response this time was different. A panicked phone call from their attorney to mine. The prospect of a public, expensive racial discrimination lawsuit terrified them. They knew it was a battle they'd likely lose. The resolution was swift. They dropped the fine. They issued a formal, written apology for the overzealousness of their employee. They sent out a community-wide directive, drafted with my lawyer's input, explicitly forbidding any HOA employee from entering private property without prior consent. And 2 weeks later, Officer Miller's little white golf cart with the flashing light was gone. I took down the wire. The signs came down, too. The gate was just a gate again. But everything had changed. The air in my backyard felt lighter. It felt like my own. I had won back my sanctuary. I had stood my ground with research, with resolve, and with a well-placed, low-voltage message that finally got through. Conclusion. The peace in Oakmont Creek is real now, not just an illusion maintained by oppressive rules. My family and I can enjoy our home without being watched or targeted. The experience taught me a hard lesson: sometimes, to get peace, you have to be willing to fight. You have to stand up, not just for your own rights, but against the systems that let those rights get trampled. So, what do you think? Did I go too far? Or when someone repeatedly violates your home and your peace, is a little shock to the system exactly what they need? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you have your own HOA nightmare story, I'd love to read it.